What's up? Welcome back to Nowstalgia. Dave here with the review of Andor Season 2. The final season is out in full on Disney+. Man, there's so much to get into with this Star Wars series. I'm going to recap the finale and also, of course, just talk about the impact and legacy of what this series will mean and how this second season has gone. There's so much to talk about. So we're going to get into all of that. Andor is an undeniable masterpiece at this point. It's so grounded in real life, whether that's character motivations, character struggles, just the actual movement of plot. When you have a truly cracked writer's room with Tony Gilroy and Beau Willimon, unsurprisingly, the dialogue truly crackles, but I remain incredibly impressed with the depth of the themes of this series. They successfully took a prequel to the prequel, Rogue One, and imbued it with so much tension and stress on the part of the viewer. It's just an impressive feat. The creation of the Luthen and Clea characters is incredible stuff. They'll go down as some of the best characters of the Disney Star Wars era. And Cassian Andor himself is now one of the great Star Wars characters. And it really is all thanks to the strength of the storytelling on this show. The grittiness, the depth, the variety of rebellion, the unglamorous work, it lands because it's something real, it's something true. And I almost felt a sense of dread watching the finale because I knew the precious minutes were almost up with this story. Season 2 to me is a big step up from Season 1, which is a hard thing to even process. Like, how was that even possible? But I thought, but Season 2 truly did not, put a foot wrong. There's so much to get into. So, I think we'll just kind of talk about it at a high level and then kind of go through some various plots and arcs. I think structurally, the idea of doing, every week a 3-episode drop, and each of those 3-episode arcs was 1 year closer to the Battle of Yavin. So we're moving forward a year each week. I thought that honestly really worked. I'm always a advocate for the week-to-week release in lieu of a binge. The Bear Season 4 is going to be released in full next month. Still baffling decision. Something like Andor, I actually thought this was really clever because these 3-episode arcs really work all together. And I think, a lot of times maybe the first episode in that arc was a lot more of setting and reestablishing where we were with all the time that's passed and the plot that's happened. And then obviously things kick into high gear with that second and third episode. I think all of that was quite clever. It's talking about, the characters at a higher level, right? I mean, there's, I think, so many plots and all of them really work and communicate different things, right? You have Andor, and Andor at times feels like a pawn in the greater story, right? There's big parts of the storytelling in Andor Season 2 that doesn't even involve Cassian. And I think that speaks to, I think, one of the most effective aspects of this was with the depth and murkiness of what it means to rebel against a galactic empire, right? You have the clear conflict between Luthen and the Masasi group, on Yavin, right? The rebels that we've historically always known. And the way they just kind of introduce Yavin in this season, first at the very beginning when Cassian gets unknowingly stranded there temporarily, and then when we just kind of come into the base in media res as we have always known it. And meanwhile, you have Luthen with his scheming and his true spycraft, on Coruscant and wherever else he's going, and the conflict between those, right? As Mon Mothma tries to play the middle. Someone like Bail Organa has his different views of things. I thought that was really done impressively well because they don't do it with overt plot so much. They really just have the characters go in different directions. Right? You have Cassian, who obviously is embedded as a Luthen agent and eventually decides to leave and join up with the Yavin group. Then you have someone like Will, who was much more, radicalized in a certain sense, working for Luthen, doing stuff with Saw Gerrera in the middle of the season. And they just have different views of what it means to do the work, what it means to get stuff done. And, they just pay all that off as you go. I mean, the finale did a great job of that, right? You have Saw arguing with the Rebel Council via hologram from Jeddah, obviously where we know he meets his end in Rogue One, and there's just a difference of opinion, a difference of tactic in terms of being productive with something like this, right? And you see it with Clea's reaction when Melshi and Andor are trying to rescue her from Coruscant, that she has like this aversion to even going to Yavin because she feels so distant and alien to that side of the rebel cause. I mean, I just really like that because it was just such an impressive and consistent through line that, again, has a lot of depth. There's so much gray area on this show. I mean, you get it again with a lot of the Gorman stuff, right? When we first get introduced to the Gorman front, they get written off by people like Andor as inexperienced, in over their heads, not ready for it, right? And then Vel, begrudgingly decides to kind of train him up. And then you have someone like Luthen who's kind of seeing the whole chessboard hovering above it all, who doesn't even care necessarily about their competence because, throwing kerosene on the fire is a net positive for the overall galactic cause. I mean, so it's also good. I also was really impressed with what they did with like some characters' thoughts on legacy, right? I think the Cyril Karn arc is actually very impressive because I think Cyril from the jump was always a character that was probably not everyone's favorite just because the guy's kind of a tough hang. He gets walked over by his mother, and then we realize that he's kind of, shacked up in a certain sense with Dedra at the start of season 2, and she's doing something similar. Meanwhile, he has such a self-importance, such a sense of needing to make a name for himself and accomplishment, and make accomplishments. And it's just in such a stark contrast to what he's actually done and how he's actually perceived by everyone around him. And there is a sense of empathy for Cyril's plight, if you could call it that. I think it's handled with a lot of care because it's like such a messy type of character. And I mean, I think the way it ends is kind of brilliant, right? Where he's effectively a pawn of the Empire on Gorman, where he thinks he's helping root out outside agitators, when in reality he is in fact the outside agitator the entire time. And then, when everything hits the fan and he goes after Cassian doesn't even know who he is before Cyril meets his end. I mean, I thought it was kind of just perfect for how that character should have went, to be honest. And on the other side of things, I think you have the Dedra arc, right? Where, I mean, talk about like an Imperial character that has really stood out like few can. I mean, obviously we've been around a lot of Imperials over the Star Wars storytelling, right? And there's a good amount of them in this, right? Of course, the iconic Orson Krennic from Rogue One, played by Ben Mendelsohn, makes his return in a handful of great scenes in season 2, which is very welcome. And Partagaz, the head of the ISB, aka Qyburn from Game of Thrones, also a great performance. But Dedra, her sense of ambition comes across, I think, quite well. I think the character is really well honed over the course of this show, and the way Dedra meets her end, where she truly gets, sidelined and locked up by the Empire for just a lack of respect for the chain of command. It feels so real, and her recklessness, her quest for glory and getting all the credit for something she'd been working towards the entire time, of course, finding and rooting out the Axis, as she called it, the spy network that Luthen and Andor were a part of. Her quick trigger ends up kind of blowing it because she isn't able to capture Luthen correctly. He gets injured by suicide attempt, of course, and then Clay is able to finish the job and prevent him from being exposed as a wealth of knowledge for the Empire to interrogate about the rebel cause. I mean, what happens with Dedra, I think, was great. I mean, the conversation that we have in the finale between her and Krennic, where I think I wrote it down. Krennic had an amazing line to her: "If you're not a rebel spy, you missed your calling." I mean, God, so much venom, right? And obviously, Mendelsohn knows how to have a line delivery. In general, I mean, again, such a crack writing team. I mean, the show doesn't waste any lines. It also doesn't really hold your hand, right? There's lots of like subtle storytelling, and maybe they'll remind you something with the recap stuff in the beginning of each episode. But like whether it's Melshi's character or the revelation about how certain information gets to people, like how Luthen learn that Bail Organa's team was compromised by the ISB, told by handfuls of lines over the course of an episode or two, but never explicitly telling you this is how Luthen knows that thing, but it's there if you pay attention. It just speaks to, I think, the strength of the writing and the strength of the show, where you don't need to be like with your pen and paper writing things down with this show, but it's also going to keep moving at a brisk pace. Everything with Gorman I thought was truly spectacular. Obviously the sets were gorgeous, and in general I thought the show looked incredible, right? Whether it was Trandrilla in the beginning, everything on Gorman, the ISB stuff on Coruscant, the safe house on Coruscant, Luthen's Antiquities Gallery, the farming planet in the beginning, was it Morcana, however you say it. Everywhere you go, the show looks fantastic. And if you think about it too, it's like there's such an economy to how like the visual storytelling works, because the Gorman stuff, it's truly only in a few locations that we spend time. It's that central square, the ISB building on site, the hotel on site, and like the underground, like, resistance bunker. That's kind of it, right? But because the show was shot on location, shot, at Pinewood, like in a traditional studio on sets, and not shot on the volume like The Mandalorian, it just looks so much more realized, and this looks great. Obviously the costume design is also spectacular. Cinematography, the color grading, like it's so visually impressive and just pops the way few streaming shows really do. But the Gorman stuff, I thought, again, was so sophisticated, because there's so many parallels to like French resistance style storytelling. Obviously there's lots of movies and novels about the French resistance, but specifically during World War II, and that's a kind of obvious callback. Of course, the Empire themselves, a very overt Nazi reference, since the 70s, from the very beginning, obviously. But with the Gorman stuff, right, I think like the push-pull of what type of rebels they want to be with their leader versus the younger people involved, all of that I thought was really good. Cassian's ambivalence to their individual plight, Luthen's desire for things to pop off regardless. But then like the truly haunting stuff is like, you see in the beginning where the Empire, including Krennic, they have this plan to extract the mineral in Gorman, and they set in motion a years-long propaganda campaign and front for justification to raise the planet. And, watching that episode, which is a callback to when the Nazis planned the final solution, Tony Gilroy has said as much. I thought that scene is kind of terrifying to watch. But then just seeing all the Gorman storytelling proceed, when you're just watching the manipulation happen in real time. And it's kind of heartbreaking stuff, because again, you spend enough time with all those characters, and I think it's done with enough nuance that like you really feel for it, but you're just watching this chess game be played when the other player has one hand behind their back and they don't even know it. I thought it was really incredible stuff. And when the KX units, when the K2SO droids get launched on them, the Empire decides to finally massacre everyone. It's absolutely terrifying stuff. But really effective, and again, visually very impressive. Was it episode 9 when Cassian rescues Mon Mothma from the Senate after she gives her iconic speech, a speech famous in the lore of Star Wars, where she basically announces the rebellion and renounces Palpatine, and then she has to escape, of course, for her life. That was fucking like a Jason Bourne movie, right? The show has so much awesome spycraft the entire time, but that was effectively like an action spy extended set piece. And Cassian is now, again, even further an essential rebel figure in Star Wars history because of that key thing. And you even get the Easter egg reference where he's going to hand her off to Gold Squadron for delivery to Yavin, which of course Gold Squadron is the characters in the Star Wars Rebels. We saw that stuff happen, that handoff happen on the animated series, several years ago at this point. But I think the tension, the just the kinetic energy of how everything moves with that rescue attempt, and again, the show is able to communicate so much tension and so much buildup with how it goes about its storytelling. I thought that all that stuff was awesome. And even everything with Mon Mothma as a character, right? Where even though she's giving that speech, she's almost appalled watching Cassian kill people to rescue her. And she almost, to that point, I felt like she could kind of be above the grittiness of the rebellion, right? You have that line where Luthen alludes to having someone killed on behalf of Mon, and Luthen says to Mon, "How nice for you," when she said she couldn't fathom such a thing or whatever, right? Like, again, like another thing where there's so much depth and so much nuance, and also like true character progression over the course of the show and over the course of the season. It's just great stuff. I think the Bix stuff really works too. Adria Arjona has a tough job on the series because Bix is largely sidelined for a lot of it as someone who's kind of struggling with the challenges of being a rebel, being someone who has to hide and move around all the time, and watching her in that safe house, the Luthen safe house, and clearly develop some kind of substance dependency, right? And the conversations that her and Cassian have, then her ultimate decision to leave in order for Cassian to do what he does best, which is be of service to the greater cause. I thought all that really worked. I mean, her leaving at the end I thought was really heartbreaking. And then you get the reveal at the very end, the final shot of the season, which was that Bix also was leaving to protect their unborn baby, which of course she later has, which we see in the final scene. I mean, I really enjoyed the Bix stuff. I thought, again, Adria Arjona had a tough task, right? Because she doesn't have a lot of action set pieces, in the series. I thought she's definitely more involved with some like big plot in season 1, but I still think that the character worked in season 2. We do, of course, learn how Cassian comes to meet K2SO, of course, the Imperial KX unit. We actually see that they, get K2SO after K2 is launched, set loose on the Gormans during the massacre. We watch K2 murder countless innocents before he gets effectively taken back to Yavin after being, broken down during the conflict, and they bring him back to life. And then, of course, Alan Tudyk gets to reprise the role. And even though K2 was really only in like 3.25 episodes on this season, God, he makes such an impression once again. I think the performance from Tudyk is tremendous, but also just the way the droid works, where he just has a certain humor, a certain dryness to the line deliveries, the kind of classic droid humor, right? Where like they're a robot and there's things about humans that they don't quite grasp or amuse them as they can be amused. I mean, everything with K2 is pretty funny. He has some great stuff in terms of killing Imperials during the finale as well. Really happy that we got a little bit of that time. And yeah, I mean, we just have to like talk about the finale, right? Where the show is able to give you so much tension about whether the rebels will get the information of the Death Star. Like, honestly, it's kind of like mind-blowing to me that you had, of course, Rogue One be this epic movie about how the rebels actually got the Death Star plans, how they got those plans to Leia that she has at the very beginning of Star Wars A New Hope, the first thing you see in Star Wars, right? Well, now Andor is able to communicate how the rebels even knew about the Death Star to then attempt to get those plans that we see in Rogue One. So it's the prequel to the prequel, as we've always been saying, but it's actually like essential Star Wars lore, essential Star Wars storytelling. And it's kind of mind-blowing because the show is made in such an incredible way where you have all this tension about whether they can pull it off, even though you know deep down that they do succeed. Like, we just have to say, like, Clea forever. Like, Clea in this last 3 episodes, iconic stuff. I mean, the performance is amazing. And I want to shout out the actress Elizabeth Dulau, who was making her acting debut as Clea right out of drama school for this role. She's awesome, and like the way her character makes a bigger and bigger impression over the course of season 2, after very much being in support of Luthen, narratively speaking, with season 1. And, I mean, so good. I mean, learning about her backstory and how her and Luthen met, and slowly built up the antiquities business, and became some of the first nascent rebels, one of the various rebel cells at the time, and all that. I mean, was so good. I mean, I watching, like, once you realize the ball's in motion, right? Once you see Lonnie have the emergency meeting with Luthen, where he is able to learn about the existence of the Death Star and understanding the true scope of the Imperial propaganda in terms of Gorman and Jedha and what they're really making. And it's all, again, because of Dedra's blind ambition that she had information she wasn't supposed to have, and Lonnie was able to steal it and find all this out. And then it's a race against time to get that information out. And I love how tactical and effortful full something like that is, where Kleya and Luthen know about the Death Star program, and it's a pain to get that out when you're under the Empire's nose on Coruscant. And of course, it cost Luthen his life, and it nearly cost Kleya hers, as well as her mental health. I mean, it's just riveting stuff. Honestly, I thought of the iconic Mon Mothma line in Return of the Jedi, where she says many Bothans died to bring us this information. Of course, that's a reference to the second Death Star, but again, it very much applies to Death Star 1. Many rebels died to bring us this information, just bring you the information, just to pull it off. The intelligence of the series is just so mind-blowing. And man, obviously Tony Gilroy is not making more Star Wars. He said as much. He wants to move on. But the fact that you had, I think, such, not just competence, but excellence behind the scenes from someone who actually isn't like an avowed Star Wars fan. It's like Tony Gilroy is not a Dave Filoni. He's just a screenwriting legend, ghostwriting legend at this point, right? And they, making something Star Wars for adults is what people have always said about Andor, but it's just true. And I mean, if you're gonna have any quibble about this show, there's not that many aliens on it. It's a lot of human characters. From a lore perspective, maybe it stands out a little bit, but I mean, the minorest of notes at this point doesn't matter, right? You still get tons of fun Easter eggs. I mean, we got Admiral Raddus again in the finale, which was so fun, right? R.I.P. my guy. You wish that we could have so many Andors, right? You wish Star Wars was in a healthy place storytelling wise, where there was multiple projects going, the movie business was consistent, and then they could make stuff like Andor, which is not as popular as The Mandalorian, but that's not a big deal, right? Star Wars is so vast and so open, again, in theory, as we always say, but in practice it hasn't been. But I think honestly too, it's hats off that they were able to make something so compelling, so rich, and so fresh about, within a very specific part in Star Wars canon, right? I mean, there's a lot of Star Wars lore beats that they had to abide to in the telling of Andor, and they pulled it off, I think, beyond our wildest expectations. I mean, it's just an absolute gift, and who knows when we'll feel this way about Star Wars or an IP series again. But yeah, Andor Season 2, obviously that was a really long-winded thing for me. I could talk about the show forever. Really tremendous stuff. I think it's my favorite show of the year thus far. I have it slotted at number 1 on my list. We'll see how that shakes out come December. Come back for that. But yeah, let me know, how did you feel about Andor Season 2? What stood out to you most about it? Obviously, there's so much depth, so much to discuss, so much to like. Let me know what you liked most about it. And for more TV reviews, more Star Wars reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time.